9 Strangest Mysteries Unsolved Disappearances. Here on this channel, we've looked at more mysteries than you could count. Everybody loves to read about the unknown, and to offer their own theories and explanations. The combination of strange facts and ambiguity allows our imagination to run wild with possibilities. So here we have 9 cases of mysteries disappearances, ranging from high-profile members of society to ghost ships.
1. Victor Grayson. Albert Victor Grayson was an English politician, born in 1881. He was a socialist and was known as a funny, honest man with a good personality, which obviously made him quite unpopular with a lot of other high-ranking politicians. Although he was a member of parliament for 3 years, he generally found it hard to gain support from other politicians, and lost most elections he ran in. He toured for a number of years, giving speeches on many topics, including the corrupt political system at home. In these speeches, he frequently accused high-ranking individuals of corruption, including the Prime Minister, whom he accused of selling political titles. And, it turns out, he was correct in these accusations. A man named Monty Gregory was selling honors for the Prime Minister. In 1920, Grayson was believed to be on the verge of exposing a major conspiracy. In September of that year, he was attacked and beaten in an attempt to scare him into submission. But this tactic failed, as Grayson didn't stop making speeches and threats to expose the truth. In late September, he got a phone call when he was having a night in with friends. He left, saying he had to go to a nearby hotel for a brief period, but it appears to have been a lie. He never went to the hotel, and instead went to the house of Monty Gregory. Why he lied about where he was going is unclear. Only the previous year, Grayson had told friends that he knew Gregory was spying on him on behalf of British intelligence. Not only does this make it clear that Gregory couldn't be trusted, but it makes it even stranger that Grayson would lie about going to see what can only be described as an enemy, especially having been attacked just weeks before. The witness who saw Grayson enter Gregory's house was not just any passerby. It was George Jackson Flamwell, the man who had painted Gregory's portrait, which means he knew exactly what Grayson looked like. This was the last time Grayson was seen. No conclusive clues were ever found as to what really happened inside the house. Gregory sold political honors for 12 more years, but when he was caught, he was able to get off by blackmailing the high-ranking officials he had sold them to. He is believed to be behind the Genevieve letter, which failed to help defeat the Labour Party as intended, but did help bring about the collapse of the Liberal Party. He is also a suspect in the death of actress Edith Ross, who died days after changing her will to leave him £18,000. This occurred right after she refused to lend him money. More than 90 years on, it is a political mystery which continues to fascinate and baffle in equal measure. Mystery still shrouds the disappearance of the flamboyant Victor Grayson, the former socialist MP for the Colne Valley, who made some very dangerous enemies. Despite the passage of time, interest in the story has never disappeared, and now Lord David Clark, a former Colne Valley MP himself and a leading authority on Grayson, is to give a special talk on the case in Huddersfield. The event, entitled, "The Curious Case of Victor Grayson MP", takes place at the University of Huddersfield on Thursday, November 20th, 7 p.m. It will feature a rare screening of a BBC film. Lord Clark was a politics lecturer at Huddersfield before embarking on his career as an MP, representing first the Colne Valley and then South Shields. After a series of shadow cabinet posts, he became Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster in 1997. In 2001, he joined the House of Lords as Baron Clark of Windermere. An expert on labour and political history, he is a research fellow at the University of Huddersfield and the author of Victor Grayson, Labour's Lost Leader, described as the definitive biography of the missing ex-MP. Grayson sensationally won the Colne Valley seat in 1907, standing as an independent socialist. Such was his charisma that many pundits believed he could become leader of the Labour movement and even Prime Minister. However, he lost the seat in 1910, and led a checkered and colourful life which seems to have come to an end in September 1920, when he left his London flat accompanied by 2 men, and was never seen again. Lord Clark has explored the theory that Grayson's disappearance was linked to his determination to expose the notorious Monty Gregory, a man accused of touting honors on behalf of Lloyd George. Among the books and programs about Grayson was a BBC Two documentary named The Curious Case of Victor Grayson, screened just once, in October 1985. Now, as part of the event, co-organizer Dr. Stephen Dorrell, an author and investigative journalist, who is now a senior lecturer at the University of Huddersfield, has retrieved the documentary and secured the rights to screen it.
2. Mary Boyle. 38 years after Mary Boyle vanished on a Donegal bog, Anne Doherty has come out of the shadows to push the authorities for a new investigation into her twin sister's disappearance. Meeting TDs in Leicester House last week, she told them that she believed her sister was dead, and that she knew the identity of the person who killed her. And she firmly believed that there was both political interference and a Garda cover-up in the case, Sinn Féin's Mary Lou MacDonald told the Daily last week, as Anne Doherty looked on from the public gallery. Anne was supported by her cousin Margot O'Donnell, country singer and sister of Daniel O'Donnell, who also claimed to have been told the name of the culprit. Both have given statements to Gardaí at Pierce Street Garda Station in Dublin, in the hope of prompting a fresh investigation. Was there a cover-up in the country's longest-running, unsolved missing persons case in Ireland? Was there political interference? According to Aidan Murray, who was a detective sergeant when Mary disappeared, there was talk that a politician attempted to intervene, but never any evidence. I only heard it in Garda conferences, but I could never prove that, he said. But the one person he believed should have been arrested never was. Murray was at home on leave on Friday, March 18, 1977, when Mary was reported missing by her distraught parents. 6-year-old Mary had been at her grandparents' house in Castleford, a remote and boggy townland outside Ballyshannon, where the extended family had lunch. Her uncle, Jerry Gallagher, was the last person to see her alive. She disappeared after lunch. Mary, her twin Anne, her brother Patrick, and their cousins were playing outside. Her uncle was working outside, and then walked across the fields to a neighbor's house to return the ladder. He said he was halfway across the field when he noticed Mary had followed him, and he told her to go back. He continued on to the neighbor's house. She never did get back. Her mother, Anne Boyle, went to check on the children and couldn't see her. At that stage, Mary's uncle was back working at the homestead. He went off to look for her but couldn't find her. Gardaí, family and scores of neighbors scoured the 450-yard stretch of land between the only two houses in the area, in a search that escalated over the following weeks into a trawl of bog holes, lakes, streams and the countryside beyond. Not a trace of Mary was ever found. Lists of persons of interest were drawn up. All were interviewed voluntarily. Murray said he did question one individual who he thought should have been arrested. He was never brought in as a suspect. According to Murray, there was talk that a politician had put in a phone call on behalf of this individual, but nothing more than that. And without a body, detectives were hindered in the scope of the investigation and their inquiries. Over the years, Murray accompanied Mary's mother on many trips to see so-called clairvoyants, who claimed wrongly to know where she was. She even went to Scotland, to the Scottish police, thinking that she would get help there. There was somebody who said she was taken over to Scotland through the north. The super said you arrange it with the police force over there, and I arranged for somebody to meet her, but that came to nothing, he said. Sadistic pedophile Robert Black later became a suspect in Mary's disappearance, after he was convicted of murdering 3 girls in 1996. He had been a long-distance truck driver whose work brought him across Ireland, north and south. Murray and his inspector traveled to interview Black, but he refused to meet the Irish officers. Murray believes there was no way that the pedophile killer was in that remote part of Ballyshannon that day. The person whom Anne Doherty believes killed Mary has never been arrested. In fact, the arrest was of a convicted sex offender from Donegal last year. He was identified following a review of the case in 2011, and questioned in prison. No further action was followed. In the book Missing and Unsolved by Barry Duggan, and Boyle said the loss of Mary had a devastating effect on the family, but especially on her twin. She, Anne, didn't seem focused. She wouldn't talk. Mary wasn't talked about for a long time. With the support of her cousin Margot, Anne Doherty started pushing hard for a fresh investigation in recent years. Margot told the Sunday Independent this weekend she could not talk about the case at this stage. A senior Garda source said their concerns, including those relating to political interference, were being taken seriously. A report is being prepared and it is expected that the National Bureau of Criminal Investigations may take over a fresh probe of Mary's disappearance. Murray said, "I always prayed that it would be solved before I retired, now I pray that it's before I die." A Garda spokesman said there have been 2 reviews of Mary Boyle's disappearance. The latest has conducted a significant investigation, interviewed a wide range of people and carried out searches. Garda are also liaising with Mary's mother, Anne.
3. SS Wardrop. The SS Wardrop was a 500-foot steamer sometimes referred to as Australia's Titanic, disappeared off South Africa late in July 1909, with the loss of all 211 persons on board. No bodies, lifeboats, wreckage, or shipboard items of any kind were ever found, making this one of the best-known examples of a ship lost entirely without trace. The disappearance of the ship remains one of the most baffling nautical mysteries of all time. The Wardrop was a British cargo passenger vessel, built by Barclay Coral and Co. in Whiteinch, Glasgow, Scotland, and operated by the Blue Anchor Line on the run between England and Australia by way of the Cape of Good Hope. That she was not fitted with wireless was not unusual for that time, when radio was still very new, although no doubt the subsequent court of inquiry might have wished that a radio telegraphy facility had been installed. This vessel was named from Wardrop, the Aboriginal word for the bright red flower of the shrub, genus Tilapia, found in eastern Australia. The Wardrop is the floral emblem of New South Wales, not the national flower of Australia. On November 5, 1908, the Wardrop began her maiden voyage from London, England, with 689 passengers in third-class accommodation and 67 first-class passengers. Her captain was Joshua Eilbury, a master with 30 years nautical experience. The subsequent inquiry into her sinking raised some disputed reports of instability on this voyage. On the ship's return to England there had been some discussion about stowage between the owners and the builders. Under the same command of Captain Eilbury, the Wardrop was on her second round trip, having sailed from London in April 27, 1909. She set out on her second trip to Australia. When she reached Australia she landed her passengers at Sydney, loaded some 6,500 tons of cargo, then set out for Durban, South Africa, where she took on coal. This was uneventful, and on July 1, 1909, she set out from Melbourne on the return journey. She was bound for the South African ports of Durban and Cape Town and was then to return to London. At Durban an interesting incident occurred. A businessman by the name of Claude G. Sawyer, who had booked his passage home from Australia to England, suddenly left the vessel. He took himself and his luggage ashore despite the fact that he had no business affairs to attend to in Durban. They had heard the reason for Mr. Sawyer's departure. He said he had recurrent bad dreams. Night after night the vision that had come to him in his bunk had terrified him into wakefulness. The ship then left for Cape Town, 800 miles away, on the evening of July 26 with 211 passengers and crew. On 27 July, it passed the Clan McIntyre. Later that day, the weather deteriorated quickly, as is common in that area. A wind gusting to 50 knots, 90 kilometers per hour, combined against the tide and ocean swell, to build waves up to 30 feet, 9 meters. That evening the Union Castle liner Gulf passed a ship and exchanged signals by lamp, but due to the bad weather and poor visibility was only able to identify the last 3 letters of her name as TAH. The same evening, a ship called the Harlow saw a large steamer coming up eastern of her, working hard in the heavy seas and making a great deal of smoke, enough to make her captain wonder if the steamer was on fire. When darkness fell, the crew of the Harlow could see the steamer's running lights approaching, but still 10 to 12 miles behind them, when there were suddenly two bright flashes from the vicinity of the steamer, and the lights vanished, and that was the last time the Wardrop was seen. The Wardrop was expected to reach Cape Town on July 29, 1909. It never reached its destination, and no trace of the ship was ever found. 2 days later the Clan MacIntyre reported that the weather had been unusually bad, with fierce winds and tremendous seas. It was the Southern Hemisphere winter. Nevertheless, she and other vessels in the area had come through safely. The master of the Clan MacIntyre told the Board of Inquiry that when she was sighted on July 27 the Wardrop was not listing, and neither was she rolling unduly in the heavy weather. The reason for her complete disappearance has never been satisfactorily explained, although there were persistent rumors that the vessel was unstable. In September 1909, the Blue Anchor Line chartered the Union Castle ship Sabine to search for the Wardrop. The search of the Sabine covered 14,000 miles, but yielded no result. In 1910 relatives of the Wardrop passengers chartered the Wakefield, and conducted a search for 3 months, which again proved unsuccessful. The official inquiry into the fate of the Wardrop was held at London in December 1910. Among others, Claude Sawyer gave testimony on that occasion. When the Wardrop was posted missing, Sawyer appeared at the inquiry, and explained the nature of these dreams. In them he is leaning on the rail and staring out to sea. A blood-spattered knight dressed in armor, and mounted on a horse suddenly rises out of the waves, holding aloft in one hand his sword and in the other a blood-soaked rag, all the while apparently trying to shout something to Sawyer. The message seems to be, "The Wardrop. The Wardrop," then the phantom knight disappears. Nobody now laughed at Sawyer's story. He was, after all, the only survivor, and that by inexplicable default. In the second half of the 20th century a pilot in the South African Air Force reported that, while flying over the sea just off the coast he had seen, very clearly, the outline of a ship lying on the bottom, close in to the shore. The pilot claimed he recognized the wreck as the Wardrop. It is not clear how he achieved this feat, the ship in question having already been submerged for more than 50 years, but subsequent efforts to locate it again failed. Some 30 or 40 years ago a popular writer of drama and mystery wrote a story about a cargo liner that ran into some of the very bad weather that often attends a passage through the Mozambique Channel, that strait of unruly water between Mozambique, on the east coast of Africa, and the island of Madagascar. The Agulhas current sweeps south through this relatively shallow channel, against the prevailing southerly winds, a confluence of events that can bring on mountainous waves. The author has his ship encounter seas so fiercely steep, that an underwater mountain is momentarily revealed in the troughs, with a huge cavern in its side into which the vessel is driven headlong, to be immediately engulfed forever by the raging ocean. Many years later, the story continues, an Air Force pilot, in search of the wreck of the ship in which his father had been an officer, discovers this very same underwater cavern during a terrible storm, brings his aircraft safely alongside the ship's hull that he discovers therein. Exactly how he achieves this underwater miracle remains a mystery, and a meeting is thereby effected between long-lost father and lately landed offspring. In 1977, a wreck was located off the Zora River mouth. Several investigations into this wreck, in particular under the leadership of Emlyn Brown, took place. It is however widely believed today that the wreck off the Zora River mouth was that of one of many ships, which had fallen victim to German U-boats during the Second World War. It has proven particularly difficult to explain why the Wardrop should be found so far to the north of her estimated position. Further attempts to locate the Wardrop took place in 1991, 1995 and 1997. While in 1999 another reports reached the newspapers that the Wardrop had been found 10 kilometers off the eastern coast of South Africa, Adelaide. A sonar scan conducted by Emlyn Brown's team had indeed located a wreck, whose outline seemed to match that of the Wardrop. In 2001, however, a closer inspection revealed differences between the Wardrop and the wreck. It appears that the team had in fact found the Nailsea Meadow, a ship which had been sunk in the Second World War. The most popular theory advanced to explain the disappearance of the Wardrop is an encounter with a freak wave, also known as a rogue wave, in the ocean off the South African coast. Such waves are known to be common in that area of the ocean. It is most likely that the Wardrop, with what seems to be marginal stability and already plowing through a severe storm, was hit by a giant wave. This either rolled the ship over outright or stove in her cargo hatches, filling the holds with water and pulling the ship down almost instantly. If the ship capsized or rolled over completely, any buoyant debris would be trapped under the wreck, explaining the lack of any bodies or wreckage in the area. This theory was given credibility through a paper by Professor Mallory of the University of Cape Town, 1973, which suggested that waves of up to 20 meters in height did occur between Richards Bay and Cape Agulhas. No evidence except the absence of the wreck supports this theory, however. Several people have suggested that the Wardrop was caught in a whirlpool, created by a combination of winds, currents and a deep ocean trench, several of which are known to be off the southeast coast of Africa. This would explain the lack of wreckage, but there is no firm evidence that a whirlpool of sufficient strength to almost instantly suck down a 450-foot-long ocean liner could be created as suggested. Given the evidence from the officers of the Harlow, it has been speculated that the Wardrop was destroyed by a sudden explosion in one of her coal bunkers. Coal dust can certainly self-combust, and in the right proportions of air be explosive. However, no single bunker explosion would cause a ship the size of the Wardrop to sink instantly, without anyone being able to launch a lifeboat or raft, and without leaving any wreckage. Several supernatural theories were also put forward to explain the disappearance of the Wardrop. One of them is the legend of Flying Dutchman that was reported by Clan McIntyre's chief officer, C.G. Phillips, while exchanged signals with the Wardrop when they sighted each other. This statement made to the English newspapers at the time. Phillips later became Commodore of the clan line, an indication of his reputation for being capable and level-headed. A gale of hurricane force had been lashing the seas when the Wardrop passed us. Some hours after I had sent the signal to the liner, I was standing on the bridge when I sighted another ship, a sailing vessel. There was something strangely old-fashioned about her rig. I'm not a superstitious man, but I know my seafaring lore. The rig of this strange vessel immediately brought to mind the legend of the Flying Dutchman. The phantom ship held me spellbound. It disappeared in the direction taken by the Wardrop, and I had a feeling it was a sign of disaster for the liner. And another one is Claude Sawyer's vision, that was reported to the London Inquiry. He claimed he had seen on 3 occasions the vision of a man, with a long sword in a peculiar dress. He was holding the sword in his right hand, and it was covered in blood. This vision was one of the reasons why he decided not to continue the voyage on the Wardrop.
4. Lloyd Lionel Gaines. Lloyd Lionel Gaines was a bright and intelligent young man, with big dreams of a better future. After the sudden death of his father when Lloyd was only 14, his mother Collie moved her family to St. Louis, Missouri from Mississippi. Lloyd graduated first in his high school class, and even won a $250 scholarship in an essay contest. He enrolled in a teacher's college, but was forced to drop out for lack of money. After getting another scholarship, and help from his brothers and black churches, he enrolled at Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri, where he became president of his senior class, an honors graduate in history and a skilled debater. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in history in 1936, but he really wanted to be a lawyer. At the time, there were only 36 black lawyers in the state of Missouri. According to a 2009 article in the New York Times, for the 1930s, Missouri's policy was enlightened. Since there was no law school at Lincoln, the state paid the tuitions of blacks from Missouri, who went to nearby states to study law. And the Missouri legislature had committed itself to establishing a law school at Lincoln someday, should there ever be enough demand. In 1936, Lloyd applied for admission to the law school at University of Missouri, but he was rejected. In April, the university denied his admission on grounds of race, even though he met all of the requirements to get into the school. Gaines hired lawyer Charles Hamilton Houston, chief litigator for the NAACP, mentor to Thurgood Marshall, and later dean of the Howard University Law School, and took their case to court. After the Boone County Court and Missouri Supreme Court both ruled in favor of the university, they proceeded to the United States Supreme Court. Gaines v. Canada was argued on November 9, 1938. It was the most important segregation case since Plessy v. Ferguson, 1896. Houston argued that the state had blatantly failed to meet the separate but equal standard, and that paying out-of-state tuition for black students from Missouri was not good enough. The court ruled 6-2 for Mr. Gaines. The basic consideration here is not as to what sort of opportunities other states provide, or whether they are as good as those in Missouri, but as to what opportunities Missouri itself furnishes to white students and denies to Negroes solely upon the ground of color, Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes wrote, The New York Times. The court's ruling was delivered on December 12, 1938. 3 months later, on March 19, 1939, Lloyd vanished in Chicago, Illinois. On March 3, 1939, in a letter to his mother, Lloyd stated his reasons for giving up his gas station job in St. Louis and moving to Chicago. His first reason I found very interesting and could quite possibly be a motive for his disappearance. There were illegal tricks of the trade being practiced by the company, gas station, that would certainly, involve me should I have remained there, until they were made public. This had to do with the practice of selling a cheap quality gas as regular gas, and the selling of the regular gas as FO, or the highest priced gasoline. No doubt I was so employed as a respected and trusted man to gyp my unsuspecting friends. Because of the gas station's location, it was nearly impossible for the company to profit. Lloyd was held responsible for the company's inability to clear expenses, even though he had no say in business policies. After not being able to find another job, Lloyd headed to Chicago for work. He found a room at a YMCA. Lloyd found it difficult to find work, but never gave up trying. He paid his rent in full up to March 7. On March 19, 1939, Lloyd told his friends he had to get stamps. It was raining and the sidewalks were covered with slush that night. However, he went anyway. Lloyd vanished and has never been seen or heard from again. His family members never believed he ran off or committed suicide, despite the pressure he had been under. They were convinced he was taken and killed. In 2006, Lloyd was awarded a law degree by the University of Missouri, and that same year, the state bar awarded him a law license, posthumously. The possibility that Lloyd was murdered because he was black is very likely. He was well known after his Supreme Court case ruling, and could have possibly been recognized and killed by a pissed-off white person. While many people obviously speculated that he was captured and killed as part of a hate crime, his mother didn't believe this was the case. She believed he would come home when he wanted, so she never filed a missing person report. Whether she knew something we don't, or she just didn't want to accept the death of her child may never be known.
5. Ellen Austin. The Ellen Austin was captained by A.J. Griffin, and sailing a London-New York route under the American flag, according to Lloyd's of London. The ship supposedly came across a derelict ship, placed on board a prize crew, and attempted to sail with it to New York in 1881. According to the stories, the derelict disappeared, others elaborating further that the derelict reappeared minus the prize crew, then disappeared again with a second prize crew on board. In 1881, during its first and final journey as a packet ship, the Ellen Austin would have its reported mysterious encounter. The Ellen Austin came across an unidentified schooner drifting just north of the Sargasso Sea, listless and sailing an erratic path. Captain of the Ellen Austin commanded his crew to follow and observe the derelict for 2 days, just in case that the abandoned ship could be a trap. After 2 days with no activity or movement from the mysterious vessel, the captain was convinced it was safe to proceed closer. The Ellen Austin moved within hailing distance. When the ship still failed to respond, the captain gathered 4 of his men, and rowed toward the abandoned ship. Then captain sent over a prize crew to investigate. They shortly confirmed the vessel was indeed strangely deserted. Upon inspection, the vessel appeared to be shipshape, and in reasonably well-maintained condition. Its sails were furled and tattered from exposure, but the vessel's rigging was intact. There was no sign of any violence, nor was there any sign of a crew. The only things missing were the ship's log and its nameplates, which for some reason had been removed from the bow. 2 of the Ellen Austin crewmen inspected the abandoned ship's hold, and reported it contained a well-packed shipment of mahogany. The captain speculated the schooner had likely been sailing from Honduras, possibly bound for England or a Mediterranean port, before something must have convinced the crew to evacuate quickly. The circumstances were indeed curious, however the captain was intrigued by the salvage opportunity of this otherwise fine ship. The prize crew was ordered to sail the vessel in tandem with the Ellen Austin. About 2 days later the Ellen Austin and the nameless schooner were parted by a squall. The Ellen Austin had been separated from the abandoned vessel for some time, before it was spotted once again by the captain's lookout. Through his spyglass, the captain could barely see the sails of the derelict. For some reason it did not seem to be following course, instead drifting aimlessly once again. When the Ellen Austin closed in on the schooner, the captain and his men attempted to hail the ship, but no answer came. He assembled an inspection team and quickly rowed to the cryptic ship. Once again, the men boarded with guns drawn. Of the prize crew, they found nothing. No one was on board. The cargo hold was still full and most everything else was in order, except there was no sign captain's prize crew had ever been on the ship. No food rations were missing. The bunks had not been slept in. And the new logbook, left by the captain upon the vessel's first discovery, had also disappeared. It was as if the first encounter between the Ellen Austin and the derelict had never happened. The crew of the Ellen Austin, now convinced the derelict was cursed, wished to abandon it at sea. The Ellen Austin crew, teeming with superstition, sailed on for London.
6. Marlborough. The Marlborough was an enormous, dual-purpose ship built in the late 19th century. It traveled between Britain and New Zealand, acting as a passenger ship to New Zealand and a cargo ship to Britain. It set sail from New Zealand in January 1890, with 33 crew members and a small number of passengers on board. By April of that year, it had not arrived in Britain and was reported missing. Many theories surround its ultimate fate. One ship claimed to have seen stranded sailors on a Chilean island in the southernmost tip of South America the following year, but were unable to help them due to stormy weather. Now the thing about ship mysteries is that a lot of them can be solved by acknowledging the fact that either the missing people fell overboard, or the ship sank. The Marlborough mystery, however, is nowhere near that simple. You see, the ship was eventually found 23 years after it disappeared. In 1913, a shipwreck was discovered by another crew in Punta Arenas, Chile. They boarded the Marlborough, which had run aground onto an extremely craggy island. 2 crew members boarded the ghost ship, and were horrified at what they found. All in all, about 20 skeletons were found on board, and in a lot of different locations. One was found alone, directly under the wheel, and another one found alone on the bridge, with 5 more nearby. No less than 3 skeletons were found by the ladder leading below the deck. The largest group found in a single area consisted of 10 skeletons, in what is known as the mess room, the main social quarters of the ship. It is these skeletons that give this case such an air of mystery. There was no evidence of foul play, which makes the placement of the skeletons extremely baffling. They obviously died at the same time, because you wouldn't leave dead bodies just lying around the ship. No less than 3 skeletons were found by the ladder leading below the deck. The largest group found in a single area consisted of 10 skeletons, in what is known as the mess room, the main social quarters of the ship. There was no evidence of foul play, which makes the placement of the skeletons extremely baffling. They obviously died at the same time, because you wouldn't leave dead bodies just lying around the ship. So how did 3 people die in the hatchway at once? It might suggest to some that they were running from something, but remember that bodies were found in different locations all over the ship, which says they weren't rounded up by anyone and killed. Another fact to remember is that a person, most likely the captain, was found under the steering wheel. Steering really wouldn't be a high priority if your crew was being killed. And apart from the fact that no damage to the bodies was reported, the captain had his sword right by him. Why wasn't this used, and then later looted? Why wasn't anything looted? And if the ship had simply run aground, everyone would have gotten off. So, according to the reports, we seem to know for sure that this is the ship that was missing for 23 years. But that's all we really know. Curiously, of the several crews that have claimed to have found the Marlborough, none have reported its location specifically enough for it to be found by modern crews. Take from that what you will.
7. William Cantillo and Sir Hiram Stevens Maxim. The story of William Cantillo and Sir Hiram Stevens Maxim remains an unexplained mystery, with possible evidence of teleportation, double lives, and corruption. William Cantillo claimed he was born around 1838, in the Isle of Wight. He first came to notice as an advanced engineer who developed many strange and unidentified objects around the 1870s. By this time, he owned a curiosity shop on French Street in Southampton. At that time he was also the landlord of the Old Tower Inn. Beneath the pub was a tunnel, where Cantillo spent much of his time turning it into an underground workshop. Visitors to this workshop made claims of seeing strange light machines humming globes, and odd weapons. It also said that Cantillo would often enter the tunnel, and not be seen again for days, or even weeks on end. Cantillo used the tunnel underneath the Old Tower Inn for his experiments, and was later joined by his two sons, both engineers themselves. Locals reported hearing noises coming from the vicinity, but the family kept their work a closely guarded secret. In early 1880 Cantillo announced that he had developed a groundbreaking machine gun. Accounts differ regarding the actual events of Cantillo's disappearance late in 1880. Some reports say that he went for an extended holiday on his own, as a reward for his hard work, but was never to return. Others claimed he was last seen entering his tunnel, and vanished in a puff of smoke and flash of lights. It is also claimed that a large sum of Cantillo's money had been transferred out of his bank account after his disappearance. Cantillo's family tried to find William but with no real success. They employed a private investigator, who claimed he traced him to America but could not find out anything more or provide evidence. Hiram Maxim was an American inventor, who appeared in the United Kingdom in 1881, claiming to be 41. With him he brought a number of new and mysterious inventions, including a groundbreaking machine gun. The Maxim gun, the first portable, fully automatic machine gun. He also submitted patents on mechanical devices such as a fire sprinkler, mousetrap, hair curling irons, and steam pumps and more. Maxim laid claim to inventing the light bulb, providing convincing evidence. He even experimented with powered flight, well before planes existed, and submitted science papers claiming that he had developed teleportation technology. Cantillo's two sons happened across a photograph of Maxim, whose similarity to their father led them to believe that he was still alive and had assumed a new identity. Descriptions of the gun also sounded similar to the one they had worked on, and they set out to investigate. The sons tried to challenge Maxim, but he wanted nothing to do with them, claiming by letter that he was from America, and not the Isle of Wight. This only led the sons to believe Maxim was in fact their father, as nobody outside of the immediate family knew they originated from the Isle of Wight. He refused to meet the boys. With good evidence to support Maxim's previous life in the USA, along with his papers claiming that he had developed a way to transport himself from one place to another, the sons believed their father had been living a double life, and teleporting himself backwards and forwards. BBC's Steve Punt investigated Cantillo's disappearance and the sons' claims. He discovered that Maxim had complained about a man who was impersonating him in America. He also showed a photograph of Cantillo next to his machine gun to the Royal Armouries, who stated that the weapon appeared to be exactly the same as the Maxim gun. A facial expert who compared the images of Cantillo and Maxim highlighted that there were some visible differences between the two men, but also some similarities.
8. Richard Cox. It is a curious fact that many of history's most bizarre mysteries center around people who had appeared to be the most normal, or even ideal figures imaginable. An outstanding example is Richard Colvin Cox. The 21-year-old West Point cadet was handsome, highly intelligent, Ambitious, well-liked, hard-working and clean living. After a fine 2-year army career, where he was stationed in Germany, he achieved his life's great dream, when he secured an appointment in the military academy. He was very much in love with his fiancée, a pretty girl from his hometown of Mansfield, Ohio, and appeared to have sterling future ahead of him. In short, he seemed to be the last person in the world to have his life engulfed by the weird. But that was exactly what happened. Cox's golden boy existence began to tarnish on January 7, 1950. The cadet who was charge of quarters in Cox's company received a phone call from a man asking if Dick Cox was there. The caller left a message: "Just tell him George called, he'll know who I am. We knew each other in Germany." Unfortunately, the cadet who took the call could only be fairly certain the man gave his name as George. When Cox was told of this phone call, he claimed to have no idea who the man could be. However, when George came to see him later that evening, he recognized him at once. The two men seemed happy to see each other, and they left together. It was presumed they were headed for the Hotel Thayer, the one dining establishment open to cadets other than the mess hall. Instead, they sat in George's car, drinking whiskey. When Cox returned to his room an hour and a half later, he was drunk, which was very much out of character for him. He was so inebriated he immediately fell asleep at his desk. When the 10:30 tattoo sounded, his two roommates were startled to see Cox suddenly spring to his feet and run into the hallway, shouting something peculiar. The two roommates thought it sounded like Alice. But it has also been speculated that he was crying "Alles kaputt," German for "all is ended." We will never know for sure what Cox was saying, or what this unguarded heart cry could have meant. Cox quickly pulled himself together somewhat. He returned to the room, and, ignoring his roommate's questions, fell on his bed and went instantly back to sleep. The next morning, he told his roommates something about his experiences the previous night. He claimed that his visitor, whose name he never mentioned, had been part of his outfit in Germany. Cox described him as a morbid guy, who liked to talk about all the killing he had done in the army. Cox added that this guy had also impregnated a German girl, and then murdered her. Despite his expressed disgust with his acquaintance, he had another meeting with a stranger that afternoon. The following week seemed perfectly normal. Cox's grades remained high, and his behavior impeccable. Then, on January 14th, despite the fact that he had expressed hope that he wouldn't have to see that fellow again, Cox was seen talking with George near his barracks. Soon afterwards, he told a friend that he would be having dinner with his mysterious acquaintance, although he did not appear to relish the idea. His fellow cadet later said that Cox seemed to think of seeing George as an unpleasant duty, but one that, for whatever reason, he could not avoid. A little after 6 p.m., Cox left his room to see George. That was the last indisputable sighting of Richard Colvin Cox. Although he had signed out, no one reported seeing him leave the barracks. There is no record of him dining at the Thayer that night, or anywhere else for that matter. He simply vanished. When Cox failed to return the next morning, the police and CID were called in. The search for the cadet became the biggest manhunt in West Point's history. And it was all in vain. Although the case has spawned much fanciful theorizing, no one has ever determined what became of this young man, whose promising life ended so quickly and bizarrely. George has also remained a phantom. Rigorous investigation never found a clue indicating who he was, or where he went. Although it is generally assumed that he was behind Cox's disappearance, it is a complete mystery how or why he would spirit off the cadet. As can be imagined, the usual wild theories floated around. Did the cadet flee in fear for his life as a result of his testimony in a court-martial? Was he somehow involved in the murder he claimed George had committed? Was he kidnapped by the Soviets in retaliation for his counter-espionage activities in Germany? Most speculation about Cox's fate focuses on his earlier military career, where he had been part of an intelligence unit. 1950 was the height of the Cold War, and it has been suggested that Cox was involved in some sort of espionage program that led to him being enlisted as a secret agent by the CIA. While this is probably the most plausible, least implausible theory, no real evidence for it has been found. In their book about the case, Oblivion, Marshal Jacobs and Harry Maylafer presented a claim, from a retired CIA official, that Cox was given a new name by the intelligence community, and spent the Cold War smuggling scientists connected to Russia's nuclear program across the Iron Curtain. Allegedly, Cox died of cancer sometime in the 1990s, his true identity still a secret. These authors believed that Cox was likely gay. A theory, however, based mainly on thin rumor. They argue that this secret, which would have jeopardized his career, inspired the cadet to stage his own disappearance. For what it's worth, Cox's family rejects this entire scenario, insisting that he would have found a way to contact his mother, to whom he had been very close. Mrs. Cox died in 1986, still tormented by the puzzle of her son's disappearance. It is impossible to say if Jacobs and Maylafer's source, who offered no proof whatsoever for all this, was credible. Their theory also fails to satisfactorily explain why it was necessary for Cox to disappear, and take on a new persona to his very grave. Jacobs and Maylafer also mentioned a curious link to the case. They learned of a suspect in a 1985 murder named Robert W. Frisbee. Many years earlier, Frisbee, under the name of Robert Dion, had been stationed at Fort Knox at the same time as Cox. It was probable that the two had known each other. Frisbee/Dion, who had once been involved in making phony IDs, was said to resemble descriptions of George. This was all intriguing, but as no one was ever able to conclusively tie Frisbee to George, and Cox's disappearance, it all proved to be just another brick wall. There are at least 2 reports of someone allegedly seeing Cox after he disappeared. In 1954, Ernest Shotwell, who had known Cox in the Army, told the FBI that 2 years earlier, he had run into Cox at a bus station in Washington, D.C. The two men spoke briefly, with Cox mentioning that he was on his way to Germany. Shotwell said his old friend was clearly displeased to see him. Cox was agitated and curt, and after a few minutes, abruptly broke off the conversation and stalked off. Shotwell said he had not spoken of this encounter before, because he had not known at the time that Cox was a missing person case. Another reported encounter with the vanished cadet supposedly took place in a Florida bar in 1960. An undercover FBI contact made the acquaintance of R.C. Mansfield, who eventually admitted that his real name was Richard Cox. When this FBI agent later learned of the Cox mystery, he tried to set up another meeting with Mansfield, but he never heard from the man again. While these reports are considered plausible, they still don't answer the question of why Cox vanished. Or, to take the simplest theory, did the sinister George, for who knows what personal reasons, murder the young cadet and hide the body somewhere in the woods, around West Point or deep in the Hudson? Richard Cox will likely always remain one of America's classic enigmatic disappearing acts.
9. Jacques Verges. He started life as a French resistance fighter in the war against Hitler, and ended up defending Nazi war criminal Klaus Barbie in court, just one of the many ironies in the life of Jacques Verges, who has died aged 88. The lawyer was dubbed the Devil's Advocate, for his aggressive defense of Barbie and other high-profile clients accused of atrocities. He was a child of the French colonies, who devoted his early career to communism and anti-imperialism, yet admired the French war hero General Charles de Gaulle. He made famous the strategy of rupture defense, whereby the lawyer seeks to break down the case against their client by undermining the very authority of the court. Some would question how often justice was served by such tactics, but Verges succeeded in scoring political points, working the media in ways that impressed contemporaries. And yet to the media he courted, he remains a man of mystery, who once seemingly vanished off the face of the earth for 8 years. Born in Thailand in 1925, to a diplomat father from Reunion and a Vietnamese mother, Verges served in the Free French forces during World War II. I kept an image of an ideal France, fostered by my secular schooling, as the mother of arts, arms and laws, he was quoted as saying by Le Point magazine. I could not resign myself to seeing it disappear under the German boot. His leftist allegiances took him through the Iron Curtain to Prague, where he spent 4 years as a communist student leader in the early 1950s, when the Cold War was at its chilliest. Returning to France, he qualified as a lawyer in 1955, and soon got involved in Algeria's bloody war, for independence from France, which he saw as another noble cause. In 1957, he used his rupture strategy to defend Jimmy Liberd, an Algerian National Liberation Front (FLN) militant sentenced to death for bomb attacks on civilian targets. After securing the FLN militant's pardon and release in 1960, he married her and they had 2 children. He also converted to Islam, a gesture which was possibly more political than religious, as he showed little sign of religiosity in later life. His legal battles in Algeria were the most remarkable part of his career, in the opinion of fellow French lawyer Henri Leclerc, who qualified around the same time, and was friendly with him for some 50 years. What he called the rupture defense was a defense without concession, where instead of trying to minimize the responsibility of those he defended, whom he considered combatants in a war, he carried the attack to the French state, Mr. Leclerc told BBC News. He was a fighting lawyer. Nathan de Arribaselier, a current French law student, takes a very different view of the tactic. His method is not a method of defense, he told BBC News. It is more about taking a political stand than law. It is more about self-promotion than safeguarding the interests of those you represent. That is why I regard it as highly dubious. The 1960s saw Verges supporting the new government in Algeria, and sympathizing with leftist revolutionaries around the developing world. At one stage, he even met Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong. But in 1970, Verges abandoned his wife and children and simply vanished. It was an event he never explained. Mr. Leclerc told BBC News he was one of the last people to see him before he left, as well as one of the first to witness his return in 1978. Asked where he had been, Verges would not say, and Mr. Leclerc believes nobody knows to this day, despite rumors that he spent time in Pol Pot's Cambodia. It's highly amusing that no one, in our modern police state, can figure out where I was for almost 10 years, Verges said in an interview for Germany's Spiegel magazine in 2008, adding, "I enjoyed reading my obituaries." Shortly after Verges's death from a heart attack in Paris, one French journalist tweeted, "It's the second time Verges disappears, and still he won't tell us where he is." The Verges who returned in 1978, was different in several respects. While he was soon defending leftist militants again, such as Carlos the Jackal, France's Action Direct Group and Palestinian militants, there was little of the politics of the past. Now it was activism for the sake of activism, according to Mr. Leclerc. On the other hand, the older Verges sought out causes with much greater international resonance, offering his services to war crimes suspects ranging from the late President Slobodan Milosevic of Yugoslavia, to former Khmer Rouge leader Kusam Fan. But the case which perhaps caused the most controversy was that of Barbie, known as the Butcher of Lyon for his crimes as Gestapo chief in that city during the war. Daniel Slez-Lariviere, another veteran French defense lawyer who interviewed Verges for books, told BBC News that some of Verges's questioning of the evidence against Barbie showed a lack of taste. And Henri Leclerc said my relations with him were a mixture of affection and anger, adding, "He had in his provocative attitude something which could upset deeply the trial's trail." While some would question why any lawyer would choose to defend a war criminal like Barbie, his deliberate exposure of French wartime collaboration in court was later commended by some Jewish historians of the Holocaust. Had it not been for ferocious counterattacks launched by Jacques Verges, the prosecution would have walked away from the trial with nothing more than the conviction of a man already twice condemned to death by French courts, according to an article by the Jewish Virtual Library. Speaking to Spiegel, Verges said, "The beauty of a trial can be measured by the trail it leaves behind, long after the sentence has been pronounced." Henri Leclerc said Verges should be remembered for his courage, his intelligence and his readiness to defend. "Clients need to be represented even if they are monsters," Mr. Slez-Lariviere remarked. "In our job as defense lawyers, we must find a guy who does that, and if we don't find one, the profession is not fulfilling its duty." Asked what, if anything, Verges meant for lawyers of the future, law student Nathan de Arribaselier said, "He could be a model for students in terms of his exceptional journey, a past as a resistance fighter, anti-colonialist convictions and his attachment to the fundamental principles of defense.